Why was the rifle engraved at all? That thought wouldn't leave her mind. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos sat beneath the thin shade of a canvas awning, her M82 stripped open on the cleaning mat, sunlight glinting on oiled steel. The desert air was already baking, the kind that dried sweat before it ever had the chance to roll. Around her, forward operating base Cobra buzzed with the usual rhythm of deployment life, shouted orders, diesel engines coughing awake, the crackle of distant radios. Yet her world had shrunk to the familiar ritual of patches, rods, solvent, and steel. It was safer to focus on the mechanics. Steel was predictable, humans weren't. Sergeant Santos, a young voice cracked through the noise. She looked up. Corporal Jake Mitchell, 22, boots still too new for this dust, carried his own awkwardly like it had grown heavier since the last patrol. His face was pale, jaw tight. He wasn't coming to ask for tips. Something was wrong. "What's the problem, Mitchell?" Maria set down her cleaning rod. He lifted the rifle, bolt assembly half stuck, frustration burning in his eyes. "It jammed yesterday near the village. I can't clear it. I've tried everything. We're stepping out again in 2 hours and I can't go out like this." Maria stood, taking the weapon from him. Her eyes swept over it with practiced calm, but then froze. There, just below the serial number, light caught a strange engraving, not the factory stamp. Something personal carved into the steel. She tilted it, squinting. 305 confirmed. Her breath caught. The numbers weren't decoration. They were a tally, below them smaller letters, RK. Maria's pulse quickened. Her fingers trembled against the cool metal. 305. That wasn't just a sniper's service record, that was a legend. She'd heard whispers in the barracks, campfire-style stories of ghosts on, shooters who bent battlefields by sheer will and skill. But here it was in her hands, not myth, not rumor. A real rifle, bearing the scars of war and a name reduced to initials. She handed the rifle back to Jake slowly. "Where did you get this?" "It was issued to me last week," he muttered, eyes darting to the ground. "Supply said it belonged to a sniper, female sniper, KIA 3 months ago." Female? Maria felt her stomach twist. There weren't many of them. The path was brutal. Each step uphill, every shot questioned, every success overlooked or attributed to luck. Whoever RK was, she had carved herself into history with precision no one could ignore, even if the army had reduced her to initials on a reissued rifle. As the jammed bolt free, grit scraped against steel, the desert's fingerprints everywhere. She worked carefully, reverently. This wasn't just maintenance. This was communion. "Keep it clean," she told Mitchell, cycling the weapon smooth again. But her mind was elsewhere. Who was RK? Why had no one spoken her name? And why did Maria feel like the engraving on that weapon wasn't meant to be forgotten, like it was meant to be found? During the briefing an hour later, Captain droned through patrol routes, contingency plans, rules of engagement. The men listened, scribbling in notebooks or staring blankly at maps. Maria sat near the back, but her mind wasn't on routes or grids. It was still tracing steel etchings, whispering over the name unsaid. 305 confirmed. What kind of person carried that weight? When the meeting ended, she didn't join the others in chow. Instead, her boots carried her toward the supply depot. A row of shipping containers turned into the beating heart of logistics. The air inside smelled of oil, paper, and sweat. Behind a cluttered desk sat Sergeant First Class Tommy Burke, a man whose sunburned skin and tired eyes told of years lived entirely in supply lines. "Burke," she said, voice steady but urgent, "I need a file, a sniper rifle, M82, serial number 7394821, issued to Corporal Mitchell yesterday." Burke froze, his pen stopping mid-scratch. His eyes lifted slowly. "That rifle," he muttered, almost reverent. "That's—" Maria's chest tightened. "The initials RK?" she asked. He pulled a folder thick with papers from a drawer, his hand slowing as if the weight wasn't just paper but memory. He slid a photo across the desk. A young woman stared back, dark eyes sharp, alive. Combat gear weighed on her shoulders, but nothing weighed her gaze. She looked Maria's age, maybe younger, but there was a hardness carved there, the kind that only came from seeing too much too soon. Staff Sergeant, Burke said, voice low. From L, joined up at 19. Infantry first. But she shot so well they pushed her to sniper school. Best natural marksman I've seen in 23 years. Maria's eyes lingered on the photo. Stare was steady, defiant, like she was daring the world to underestimate her. Maria felt a pang of recognition. That same fire lived in her own reflection some days, the fire of a woman who had to prove, again and again, that she belonged. Burke flipped pages, training records, commendations, maps marked with red dots. Each dot was a life taken, each dot a soldier saved. 3 deployments, Burke said. 18 months in total combat. She could read a battlefield like other people read a map. Saved patrols from ambushes. Broke assaults before they happened. Those 305 weren't numbers to her. They were shields. Maria touched the map lightly. The dots weren't random. They formed patterns, lines of defense, shields drawn in blood. She never bragged, Burke said. Carried the weight of every pull of the trigger. You could see it in her shoulders, but she kept going, because she knew if she didn't, someone else's kid wouldn't make it home. Maria swallowed hard. Her throat ached. She didn't even know, yet she felt as if a piece of herself had just been revealed. What happened? She whispered. Burke hesitated, then sighed. 3 months ago, overwatch for a raid, intelligence leaked. Taliban hit her position, 40 fighters. She held them off for 2 hours, long enough to get our guys out. His voice thinned. She never left the ridge. Maria shut her eyes. She pictured it, a lone figure on the rocks, rifle steady, surrounded but unbroken, fighting until there was nothing left to fight with. They found her rifle beside her, Burke said. Loaded, ready, she never gave it up. The room went quiet. Maria's hand trembled as she touched the folder. She felt like she was holding ghost. There was more Maria wanted to ask, needed to ask, about who was beyond numbers and records, about what she had carried in silence. But Burke slid the folder closed. You'll have to talk to the chaplain for the rest, he said. He keeps personal effects. Maria left the depot with face burned into her mind, her heart pounding like she had inherited something without asking for it. She walked past tents and armored vehicles, past chatter and noise, but it all blurred. The rifle, the engraving, the initials. It wasn't just history. It was a message. And though had fallen months ago, Maria felt the weight of her eyes in every shadow, the whisper of her hand on steel, the echo of her choice on that ridge. What if hadn't died to be forgotten? What if the rifle was only the beginning? What kind of woman would carve her legacy into steel? That question circled Maria's mind long after she left the supply depot. She could still see the photograph Burke had shown her, dark eyes steady, lips pressed in that faint expression soldiers wore when they knew too much about the world. A stranger, and yet not. Maria felt tethered to her now, like 2 points on the same line. The evening air over FOB Cobra carried the smell of dust and burning diesel. Soldiers crowded the mess tent, voices too loud, laughter too sharp, a kind of defiance against the silence of the desert beyond. Maria didn't join them. Instead, she walked toward the one building where she knew quiet lived, the chaplain's office. Chaplain Major David Foster greeted her with the calm of a man who had seen too many broken hearts and tried to stitch them back together with words. His office was lined with photos of soldiers lost, letters tucked in frames, tokens that whispered stories Maria wasn't sure she was ready to hear. Sergeant Santos, he said gently, Burke told me you were asking about Staff Sergeant. Maria sat across from him, her uniform still dust-stained from the day's patrol. She hesitated before speaking, as if saying the words would make the weight heavier. I saw her rifle, the engraving. I need to understand who she was. Foster nodded as though he had been waiting for this. He opened a drawer and lifted out a wooden box, its edges worn, its lock scratched. He set it on the desk between them. Asked me to keep these. Said if anything happened, I should decide who to give them to. Maria's throat tightened. Her fingers brushed the wood before lifting the lid. Inside lay photographs, folded letters, a leather-bound journal worn thin at the corners. The first letter she unfolded was postmarked from L. The handwriting was uneven, youthful. Dear Mom worries every time she hears the news. She thinks you're invincible, but I know better. Still, the neighborhood brags about you like you're a superhero. Remember when you used to shoot Kens off the fence with Dad's old rifle? You said someday you'd be the best shot in the world. Guess you weren't lying. But we're proud of you not for how many enemies you've stopped, but because you're protecting people. That's who you've always been. Signed Carlos, her younger brother. Maria folded it slowly, her hands trembling. She could picture the home, the mother glued to the TV, the brother trying to be strong. A family carrying pride and fear in equal measure. The chaplain opened the journal to a marked page. "Read this," he said softly. Maria's eyes moved over his handwriting, each word pressed into the paper with purpose. Every time I look through my scope, I think of Carlos walking to school. I think of Maria next door who hides from her husband's fists. I think of the people back home who can't protect themselves. Each shot I take here is one less threat that might reach them. It's not about numbers. It's about being the shield. Maria's breath caught. The words felt eerily familiar, like echoes of her own thoughts in quiet hours. That tension, duty versus the ache of what duty demanded. The chaplain handed her another photo, a young woman holding a newborn, cheeks wet with tears, a note scrawled on the back. "Thank you for bringing my husband home. Emma Rose Johnson." "Kept these," Foster said. "Letters from families she saved. She measured her life not in kills, but in who lived because of them." Maria turned the photo over and over, her heart heavy. She thought of her own record, confirmed shots she rarely spoke of. She had tried not to count. Yet here was, carrying the numbers openly, engraved on steel. Not pride, proof. There was one more item. A small metal cross on a chain, its surface worn smooth by years of touch. "She asked me to bless it before her last mission," Foster said. "Said she had a feeling." His eyes softened. "She wanted whoever carried her rifle after her to have this too, and one more thing." He slid an envelope across the desk, sealed, the name blank. Maria stared at it. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. She already knew. Somehow she knew. "This letter," Foster said quietly, "was meant for whoever would inherit her weapon." Maria took it with shaking hands, tucking it into her pocket without opening it. Not yet. Not when the air already felt heavy with someone else's unfinished life. That night she lay in her bunk, unable to sleep. The bass around her hummed muffled conversations, distant hum of generators, the occasional pop of gunfire far out in the valley. But inside her chest, it was voice that echoed through journal lines, through her brother's letter, through the engraving on the weapon. She pulled the envelope from her pocket, staring at it in the dim light. Her fingers hesitated, then broke the seal. "To the warrior who carries my rifle," it began. Maria's heart pounded. "You have inherited more than a weapon. You've inherited a responsibility to shield those who cannot shield themselves. The number 305 represents lives taken, but more importantly, countless lives saved. Use it with honor. Remember, every shot you take echoes in eternity. Stay strong. Stay faithful. Come home safe. Your sister in arms." Maria pressed the paper to her chest. Her eyes burned, but she didn't let the tears fall. Wasn't just history now. She was present in Maria's hands, in her choices. And Maria knew the next time her finger rested against a trigger, she wouldn't be pulling alone. What drives someone to climb a ridge knowing they might never come down? That question pressed against Maria's chest as the patrol convoy rolled across rocky terrain 2 weeks later. She had studied the maps, Red's after-action reports traced red ink circles where lives had ended and others had been saved. But paper wasn't enough. She needed to stand where had stood, to breathe the same dust, to see the world through her scope. Captain hadn't understood her request. It's just high ground, Santos. We've got dozens like it. But it wasn't just high ground. It was the place where had chosen to fight her last fight. The vehicles jolted over broken ground, suspension groaning with each dip. Corporal Jake Mitchell sat up front, his rifle strapped securely in its case beside him. He hadn't stopped asking about her since the engraving was discovered, his voice restless with curiosity. Over the radio he finally spoke. "Sergeant, what was she like? As a person, I mean." Maria stared out the window at the barren hills, the horizon shimmering with heat. "She was like us, Mitchell," she said quietly. "Only she believed protecting others was worth any cost, even her own." The convoy stopped at the base of the ridge. Rising 300 meters above the valley, the slope looked almost ordinary: jagged rock, loose shale, a scatter of scrub trees clinging to impossible soil. But from the top, the view was commanding. Fields of fire stretched in every direction, had picked her ground perfectly. The climb was punishing, boots sliding on gravel, sun burning their necks. Sweat stung Maria's eyes, but she pushed higher, driven by something she couldn't name. When they reached the crest, silence settled over the patrol. Empty brass casings still littered the rocks, glinting in the light like relics from a battle that hadn't finished echoing. The air felt heavy, as if it still remembered gunpowder and screams. Staff Sergeant David crouched, running his hand over the stone barriers had built. She prepared for this. Ammo caches within reach, overlapping fields of fire, backup cover positions. She didn't panic. She planned for a long fight. Maria lowered herself into one of those positions, pressing her cheek against the rifle rest carved into stone. Through her binoculars she traced the valley below, the approaches the Taliban had used, the choke points had controlled. She could almost see it unfold. Enemies flooding in, scope cutting them down, the world narrowing to targets and time. "She held 40 fighters from here," Maria whispered, "for 2 hours, alone." Jake opened the rifle case with care, his hands reverent. "Permission to set her rifle up, Sergeant." Maria nodded. The click of the bipod, the heavy frame settling into stone, it was as if had never left. Jake fired one test shot. The rifle thundered, echoing across the valley. The sound hung in the air as though answering ghosts. "Check this out," Corporal Lisa called from a few meters away. She had found secondary fighting position, hidden by boulders. Inside, neatly stacked, lay spare magazines, medical supplies, even water rations. Maria joined her. The preparation spoke of a sniper who had accepted her odds but refused to surrender to them. Every detail was deliberate. Hadn't fought hopping to survive. She had fought knowing her survival was already given away. Among the supplies lay something unexpected, a waterproof-wrapped notebook. Maria's pulse spiked as she unsealed it. Inside, his handwriting filled the pages. Day 3 of Overwatch. Enemy movement unusual, more chatter on radios, weapons caches in the village, something coming. Day 5, leak confirmed. They know about the raid, should abort, but too many lives at risk, holding position. Maria's hands trembled as she read the last entry. "They're coming. 4 dozen fighters, maybe more. I can hold them long enough for extraction to reach the village. This ridge will be my last. Tell my family I chose to fight because that's what warriors do." Her throat tightened. The words were more than ink. They were final breath pressed into paper before the storm closed in. "Movement," Jake's voice cut sharply through the silence. Maria snapped her binoculars up. In the village below, figures slipped between buildings, too deliberate to be farmers. Civilian clothes, but their stances betrayed training. They were setting positions, mirroring the same ambush had described. Staff Sergeant muttered, "Could be nothing." But Maria saw it, the precision, the concealment. "It's a trap," she whispered. "Same pattern wrote about." Her radio crackled. Captain's voice cut in, flat and commanding. "All call signs be advised. A patrol is missing. 2 vehicles, 12 soldiers. Last seen near your location." Maria's stomach turned to ice. Another American unit, walking straight into the same kind of kill box that had taken's life. "Sir," she transmitted, her voice urgent. "We have overwatch. We can cover their approach." "Negative, Santos. Recon only. Extract to Rally Point Alpha immediately." Her gaze dropped to his rifle, then to Jake's waiting eyes. The echoes of his journal pressed against her heart. Every shot means fewer threats that might reach home. "Mitchell," she said quietly. Her voice carried a weight that left no room for hesitation. "Set that rifle. Long-range engagement." He blinked, torn between orders and instinct. "Sergeant, the captain." Maria's eyes hardened. Disobeyed to save lives. Sometimes duty means choosing between the book and what's right. We're not leaving them. Below, distant gunfire cracked. The ambush had begun. American voices shouted, chaos erupting in the valley. Maria pressed her cheek against its rifle rest, aligning her scope with the chaos below. Her finger settled against the trigger, and for a heartbeat she swore she felt another finger resting over hers. "On my mark," she whispered. The war wasn't finished with this ridge. And neither was. How many choices could a single trigger pull rewrite? Maria's scope cut through the haze, locking on movement below. 12 Americans scrambled into cover as gunfire tore through the village streets. Muzzle flashes erupted from rooftops, alleys, hidden courtyards. The missing patrol had walked straight into the same jaws that had devoured months before. Maria exhaled, the crosshairs steady on a rooftop fighter leveling his AK at the pinned convoy. Her finger tightened. Crack! The thundered, its recoil slamming her shoulder. The target collapsed, weapon clattering against stone. Silence followed for half a second. Then the valley erupted in fresh chaos as insurgents realized eyes were on them from above. Jake Mitchell's hands shook on the spotter scope. One down, more moving east fast. "Call them out," Maria ordered, already shifting her aim. Her heart hammered, but her breathing stayed slow. Journal words whispered in her ear. Every shot echoes in eternity. Another fighter darted from behind a wall, RPG slung over his shoulder. Maria tracked him, waited for the half-beat when he slowed to aim. Crack! Dust lifted and the threat dropped mid-step. Below, American voices shouted, emboldened by the unseen guardian striking from the ridge. They didn't know who was covering them, only that someone was. Huddled behind rock cover, scanning the valley with binoculars. "We're outnumbered, Santos. At least 35 fighters and more closing from the north." Maria swallowed the knot of fear that rose. She felt it in her chest, the edge where bravery blurred into terror. Had stood here, had felt this exact weight. Jake's voice cracked. "Sergeant, what if we can't hold them?" Maria didn't answer at first. She lined up another shot, squeezing gently, watching a rooftop collapse around its inhabitant. Only when the echo faded did she speak. "We don't have to hold forever. We just have to hold long enough." A rocket-propelled grenade whooshed, striking near the trapped patrol. Shrapnel sprayed the air, screams rose. Maria's breath caught, rage surging hot. She shifted fast, sighting the RPG gunner celebrating his shot. Her trigger broke him mid-cheer. Her rifle's rhythm became a drumbeat. Each pull a choice, each impact a stave of music composed in survival. "Ammo check," she barked, ejecting another spent magazine. "3 left," Jake called, feeding her another mag with trembling hands. The firefight below grew harsher. The patrol, still pinned, was fighting to stay alive. Maria's shots created windows, moments of air where men could scramble into better positions, but the enemy kept coming. Through the scope she caught movement, 2 fighters circling, flanking the Americans with precision had warned about in her notes. Maria adjusted, exhaled. The trigger broke. One fell. She swung, cracked again, the other slumping against stone. Jake whispered, "You're saving them." Maria's throat tightened. The weight of cross around her neck felt heavier with each shot. She wasn't saving them alone. She was finishing a fight had started. Then came the break. The enemy shifted, focusing fire uphill. Bullets smacked stone, shards biting Maria's cheek. One round cracked so close she flinched, ducking. The ridge was no longer safe. "They've spotted us," shouted. "Good," Maria spat, reloading. "That means they're not all firing at our guys anymore." She rose again, scope sweeping. Her pulse raced. Every part of her screamed to stay down, but hadn't stayed down, had stood until she couldn't. Another figure raised an RPG. Maria aimed. Clicking. Empty. Jake scrambled for a fresh magazine, panic in his voice. "Sergeant." She seized it, slammed it home, racked the bolt. Her shot broke a second before the RPG would have loosed. Smoke puffed red from the man's chest as the weapon clattered uselessly. The ridge roared with answering gunfire. Dirt spat inches from Maria's face. She ducked, heart hammering so loud it drowned out the chaos. For one dizzying second she felt presence so close it was as if another body pressed against her, whispering, "Don't stop now." The radio crackled alive. Captain's voice, sharp with confusion. "Santos, reports of sniper fire from your position. What the hell are you doing?" Maria pressed transmit, voice firm but thick with adrenaline. "Saving Americans, sir." "That's a direct order violation," barked. Maria snapped back, "And 12 of your men are alive because of it." She cut the transmission before he could reply. Jake's voice shook, eyes never leaving the scope. "Targets thinning. They're breaking, Sergeant, they're breaking." Maria looked down. The patrol was moving, pulling wounded, regrouping under the cover her shots had carved for them. Enemy fighters were retreating into shadows, their confidence broken by the unseen wrath from above. Her rifle smoked, her shoulder ached. Her lips whispered words she hadn't planned, "This ridge is ours." And in the silence after the last shot, she swore the valley itself breathed differently, as if it remembered 2 women now, not one. What price does a soldier pay for disobedience when lives are the currency? The valley was quiet now. Smoke drifted lazily from burning rooftops, rising like prayers that would never be answered. Down below, the trapped patrol moved at last, dragging wounded comrades into the protection of armored vehicles. Engines roared as they pulled away, battered but alive. Maria lowered the slowly, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. Her cheek ached from stone, her shoulder bruised from recoil. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Around her, Jake and sat stunned, the adrenaline still burning off them like static. "They're safe," Jake whispered, as if saying it too loudly would undo the fact. "They made it." Maria nodded, but the relief was jagged. Saving them had cost something she couldn't yet measure. The radio on her shoulder crackled again, sharp, unforgiving. "Santos, report to command, now." The ride back to base was suffocating. No one spoke. Dust clouds trailed the convoy, blurring the desert horizon into a dull smear. Maria kept rifle across her knees, staring at the engraving until the numbers swam in her vision. 305. And now, 12 more. How many names fit inside a number before it became too heavy to bear? At FOB Cobra, Captain was waiting. His jaw was locked tight, his eyes blazing. The other soldiers stepped aside, watching the confrontation unfold. "Inside," he snapped, marching into the operations tent. Maria followed, Jake trailing a nervous step behind. The air inside was thick with tension. Turned on her, voice low but sharp enough to cut. "What the hell were you thinking? I gave you a direct order to extract." Maria stood stiff, sweat drying against her skin. "Sir, that patrol would have been slaughtered. We had position. We had the shot." She stopped herself, biting down on the name. Slammed his hand against the table, maps fluttering. "Is dead. And if you keep pulling stunts like that, you will be too. You don't get to decide when orders matter and when they don't. Maria met his glare without flinching. With respect, sir, sometimes orders don't matter if they bury men alive. Sometimes you have to choose between the book and what's right. His nostrils flared. For a moment she thought he'd explode, strip her rank on the spot. But then his jaw tightened and his voice dropped to a dangerous calm. You think you saved them today? Maybe you did, but you've set a precedent. You've told every soldier under you that they get to choose which orders they follow. That is chaos, Santos, and chaos kills more men than the enemy ever could. The silence that followed was suffocating. Maria's heart hammered, but she refused to look away. Finally exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. Get out. We'll revisit this when I decide what to do with you. Outside, Jake fell into step beside her. Sergeant, you did the right thing. They're alive because of you. Maria wanted to believe that, but the captain's words clung like smoke. Was saving 12 worth the risk of fracturing discipline? Was example a lesson or a warning? That night Maria sat alone in her bunk, letter unfolded in her lap. Every shot you take echoes in eternity. She traced the ink with her finger, her throat tight. Hadn't been afraid to bear the weight of disobedience. She had stood anyway. But had died on that ridge. Maria pressed the letter to her chest and closed her eyes. The camp outside buzzed with life, but inside she felt alone, torn between duty and conscience. One demanded silence, the other demanded action. Sleep came late and heavy, and when it did she dreamed of ridge not empty but alive with gunfire and smoke. She saw there, hair whipped by the wind, cross glinting against her chest. Turned, eyes locking on hers, and for a heartbeat Maria felt the question echo in her bones. Would you stand here too? Maria woke with her heart pounding, her answer unspoken. What does it mean to inherit a legacy you never asked for? 3 months later, the chapel at FOB Cobra filled with silence. Not the easy silence of rest, but the heavy kind that pressed on shoulders, the kind that made every cough, every shifting boot sound like an intrusion. Sunlight streamed through dusty windows, cutting across rows of soldiers seated stiffly in uniform. At the front of the room, a silver star rested on a velvet cushion, the medal had earned with her last breath. Maria stood near the front, letter folded carefully in her breast pocket, rifle displayed in a presentation case beside the medal. She wasn't speaking, Captain was. His voice rang steady, reading from prepared remarks. Staff Sergeant, the highest traditions of the United States Army. Her courage, skill, and selfless dedication saved countless lives. Though she fell in combat, her actions continue to protect us all. The words were polished, official, the kind that sounded right on paper, but Maria's chest ached as she listened. Was more than a citation. She had been a sister, a shield, a woman who carried burdens no speech could capture. After the ceremony, soldiers lingered. Families had been flown in, strangers to the base, but bound here by sacrifice. Maria watched as Private Johnson's wife approached the medal, tears sliding down her cheeks. She carried a little girl on her hip, Emma Rose, named for the sniper who had kept her father alive. I never got to thank her, the woman whispered, touching the medal's edge with trembling fingers. But my daughter will grow up knowing her name. Maria swallowed hard, emotion burning her throat. One by one, other families came forward, 17 of them, each with their own photos, their own stories of survival written in ink. That night, during the small reception, Sergeant First Class Tommy Burke found Maria standing apart. His weathered face softened as he pressed a folder into her hand. Captain, put this through, he said. Maria opened it, eyes widening. A Bronze Star recommendation for her actions on the ridge. Her breath caught. I disobeyed orders. Burke gave a weary half-smile. Sometimes disobedience is the only thing that saves lives. The men you covered haven't stopped talking about you. Command couldn't ignore it. Maria stared at the paper, the the weight of irony sinking in. She had followed example, and now she was being honored for the very thing that had nearly gotten killed. Jake appeared then, cradling's rifle in its case. He held it out with both hands, his young face solemn. "This belongs to you, Sergeant, not me." Maria shook her head. "It was issued to you. You're its soldier now." Jake's grip tightened. "No, ma'am, you carried her will that day. You earned it. You carry it forward." Maria's hands trembled as she accepted the case. For a moment she felt presence again, the echo of her voice. "Be the shield." Jake wasn't finished. From his pocket he pulled a small disc of metal, machine-stamped, rough. On one side the engraving of Silver Star, on the other, 317 confirmed MS. Maria's throat closed. 12 more had been added to 305. Her initials carved besides, bound together in steel. She whispered, "This isn't about numbers." Jake nodded. "I know it's about lives, but lives have to be remembered somehow." Later, the chaplain found her in the quiet, his personal effects box in his hands. Inside lay the small metal cross had worn on her final mission. "She wanted whoever carried her rifle to have this," Foster said softly. Maria fastened it around her neck. The metal was cool, weighty, but it warmed quickly against her skin. A symbol of faith, yes, but also of burden, of courage, of a promise whispered from one warrior to another. She wasn't just Maria Santos anymore. She was custodian of story. The rifle, the medal, the cross, they weren't artifacts. They were a torch, and she had been chosen to carry it. That night, as the base quieted, Maria sat with the rifle across her lap. She ran her hand over the engraving again, 305 confirmed. Now joined by 317, 2 names bound in steel. Legacy wasn't a gift, it was a weight, and Maria understood now that she hadn't inherited it by chance. She had inherited it because she was willing to bear it. But could she carry it without breaking? When does a weapon stop being steel and start becoming a story? 6 months later, Maria stood in a classroom at Fort Benning, sunlight filtering through tall windows, dust motes drifting like tiny parachutes in the air. Before her sat a dozen young women, fresh recruits, nervous but sharp-eyed. They wore fatigues that still looked too crisp, boots without scars, hair tucked neatly beneath caps. But their gazes carried something Maria recognized: hunger. The kind of hunger must have carried the first time she stepped onto a range, determined to prove herself in a world that doubted her. On the table behind Maria, encased in glass, lay the M82's rifle, their rifle now. The engraving caught the light, 305 confirmed, 317 confirmed, 2 sets of initials etched into the same steel. Maria let the silence stretch before she spoke. "This weapon has served 2 masters," she began, voice steady but low, the kind meant for stories that weren't entirely yours to tell. Both women understood the same truth, that being a sniper isn't about numbers or glory. It's about being the guardian who stands watch while others sleep. The recruits leaned forward. One young woman, by her accent, raised a hand. "Sergeant Santos, what happened to Staff Sergeant? Why did her service end?" Maria paused. The room seemed to hold its breath. She had told story many times since that memorial, but the words never came easily. Each retelling reopened something inside her, yet each also rebuilt it stronger. "She died doing what she was trained to do," Maria said finally. "She chose to stay on her ridge when others would have left. She chose to protect her brothers in arms, even when it meant she wouldn't see tomorrow. That choice is what defines us. Not the kills, not the medals, the choice." Another recruit asked, softer this time, "Do you think we'll face that choice?" Maria looked at their faces, some barely older than children. She thought of herself, of nights staring through scopes with the desert wind gnawing at her skin. "Probably," she admitted. "Every sniper eventually does. The question isn't whether you'll face it. The question is whether you'll be ready when it comes." The room fell silent. The weight of her words pressed down, but she saw it, resolve sparking in their eyes, the silent nods that said they understood more than their age should have allowed. Training days blurred into weeks. Maria walked the firing line, correcting stances, adjusting breathing, teaching them the rhythm of patience. She showed them how to still their hearts, how to listen to wind, how to calculate distance not just in meters but in lives. At night, when the range was empty, she would sit alone with his rifle, journal open to the last entry. Tell my family I chose to stand and fight because that's what warriors do. The recruits didn't know it, but every lesson Maria gave them was steeped in words. When she told them to respect each shot, she was channeling's reminder that each pull carried a soul. When she demanded perfection in their fields of fire, she was echoing's tactical brilliance. When she told them that courage wasn't loud but quiet, steady, unseen, she was speaking's creed. Sometimes, during long days on the range, Maria would catch the recruits glancing at the glass case. Not at her, at the rifle. Their eyes lingered on it like pilgrims before a relic. They didn't see it as a tool. They saw it as a story they hoped to be worthy of. One evening, as the sun sank low, Maria dismissed the recruits and stayed behind. She unlatched the glass, lifting's rifle free. The weight felt familiar, almost comforting now. She carried it to the range and lay prone, cheeks settling against the cold steel rest. Through the scope, the world narrowed, sharp, controlled. Her finger hovered over the trigger, but she didn't fire. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about targets. It was about connection, about remembering the woman who had once lain the same way, under the same sky, carrying the same burden. Maria whispered into the dusk, "I'm carrying it, I promise." The wind stirred as if answering, tugging at her collar, rustling the grass. And Maria understood then, his legacy wasn't just about her. It wasn't even just about. It was about these young women in the classroom, about every soldier who would pick up a rifle and ask themselves the question had asked at the end, will I stand when it matters? The legacy had stopped being alone. It had become a chain, each link forged by sacrifice, each link carried forward by choice. And Maria knew she was no longer just a sniper. She was the keeper of that chain. What remains when the battle ends, when rifles are cased and medals tucked away? Months had passed since that night on the ridge, since Maria had pressed her cheek to his rifle and felt another presence in her trigger finger. The war hadn't ended. It never truly did. But Maria's role in it had shifted. She was no longer only a sniper. She had become something else, a custodian of memory, a bridge between one warrior's sacrifice and another's beginning. At Fort Benning, she kept training new recruits. Some days she saw fear in their eyes, other days pride, sometimes both in the same glance. She reminded them that a sniper's true enemy was never just the one in the scope. It was the silence afterward, the reckoning with yourself, the weight of choice. When classes ended, she often stayed behind alone. She would open his journal to that last entry, fingers resting on the words that had become scripture. Tell my family I chose to stand and fight because that's what warriors do. And every time she read it, she wondered what would think of her now. Would she be proud? Or would she simply nod, knowing that someone else had picked up what she left behind? The memorial service still played in Maria's mind. She could see Silver Star glinting in the sunlight, hear the voices of families who would forever measure their lives in the breaths had preserved for them. She remembered Private Johnson's wife, clutching her daughter, whispering, she'll grow up knowing's name. Maria carried those voices with her. They spoke louder than the recoil of any rifle, louder than the praise or scolding of commanders. They reminded her that legacies weren't numbers etched into steel. They were children learning to walk, wives waiting for husbands, brothers writing letters home. One evening after the recruits had gone, Maria sat in her quarters cleaning her personal rifle. Beside her, his cross lay on the table. Its surface caught the lamplight, gleaming softly. Maria reached for it, fastening it around her neck as she had the day the chaplain first handed it to her. She whispered a quiet prayer, not for safety, not for glory, but for strength to bear the weight she carried. The door knocked gently. Jake Mitchell stepped in, older somehow, though only months had passed. His eyes no longer held the restless fear they once did. He glanced at the glass case holding his rifle and then at Maria. "Sergeant," he said, "I've been thinking about that day on the ridge, about you." Maria looked up, silent, waiting. "You taught me something," Jake continued, voice unsteady. "Orders matter, but lives matter more. And sometimes being a soldier means deciding which one to protect in the moment. You made the choice, did, and because of it I'm here. They're here. That's the kind of legacy I want to carry forward." He hesitated, then added softly, "Thank you." Maria didn't reply right away. Instead, she studied his face, the way youth had been burned off by fire too early. Finally, she nodded. "Carry it well, Mitchell. That's all would ask of any of us." Later that night, long after the base had quieted, Maria opened journal again. She turned to the final page, tracing the signature, "Staff Sergeant, United States Army." Then she wrote beneath it in careful pen, as if continuing a conversation that hadn't truly ended. "Maria Santos, Staff Sergeant, United States Army, carrying forward what you began." She closed the book and leaned back, the weight of the cross warm against her chest. Outside, the night hummed with crickets, the world briefly at peace. And Maria understood, perhaps for the first time, what had really left behind. Not just a rifle, not just numbers, not even just lives saved. She had left behind the courage to choose, to stand when others couldn't, to hold when others broke, to believe that sacrifice meant something even when no one was watching. The next morning, Maria walked into the classroom and faced her recruits. She didn't bring the rifle out this time. She didn't need to. She carried its story in her voice, its weight in her silence. She looked at the young women, some biting lips nervously, some staring back with fire in their eyes. She thought of herself, thought of the unbroken chain stretching backward and forward through time. And she said only this: "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The room went still, the words sinking deep. Maria knew then that legacy wasn't hers to hold alone anymore. It lived in every pair of eyes before her, in every breath of determination, in every choice yet to be made. The rifle would gather dust one day. The medals would tarnish. Even names might fade in memory. But the dignity of what had done, of what Maria now carried, would remain. Unspoken, steady, eternal.